Just going to clean the rewind knob. So I'm going to unscrew the screw from that. Just check that this is nice and clean in here. There's no obvious corrosion, and that probably didn't need to be done at all. Put some synthetic grease on there, pop that back over. Do up the screw. Now that's ready to go back on the camera top when we get there. Carrying on with this camera, since that's the one we've been working on. We're getting close to the end for this. Now, I'm going to put a tiny drop of lacquer in here and here to prevent that screw from wanting to work its way loose. That's all it takes. You don't need to coat the whole screw with lacquer. There's no great advantage in doing things like that. While the top's off here, I'm going to put some synthetic grease there. The rack will carry that round and it'll transfer to all of these points at the same time, and a white behind that. My exposure meter for this camera is here. I'll just clean the top of that down slightly. And the underside. The glass, I'll clean that once it's in place. To fit the exposure meter, we need to do a couple of things. One is we need to put the film release button back, so I'm just running some molybdenum paste through the centre of that. Take its spring, put its spring on there, drop that into place. The screw we put on the top of the camera here on that bracket to hold it while we've been working, that can come out. The meter can go in place. Now this film release button almost always just sticks. You've got to manipulate that to make sure that it's seated correctly. Put our screw back in there. There is another screw that goes in at the front, down in here. The shutter release button goes on the top right here. Now, last chance to look at the rangefinder, make sure there are no greasy thumbprints. Everything's looking good. Check the top cover. Last blow to remove any dust and slide it into place. Now I want to check the frame counter to make sure it works correctly. That's centered up on the number. It's centered up on the number and it only moved one number. You've got to watch that closely, because if there's an adjustment problem there, you may find it moves nice and neatly, but it's actually moving 2 frames at a time. And that's not good. Means that you think you've got to the end of your 36 shot film, but actually you've only taken 18 photos. Putting these chrome screws back in the top cover. Check that the film release button and the shutter release moves smoothly. on our rewind, we had this washer. Hang on, where's the collar? There's the collar. Then the washer. Do that up tight, check that it rises and falls nicely. That's good. So the top of the camera body's dealt with. At the base of the camera I've got to put my leatherettes back. I need to put the leatherette back now, so first I've got to clean it. This is the newer of the cameras, the one with the chrome trim around the base, and the leatherette on this one came off quite easily by comparison. So this leatherette's in quite good condition, a little bit of corrosion marks on it. Just scraping off any lumps and bumps of adhesive that might be on there. That looks pretty good. And here's the patch for the film advance lever. Likewise, I'm just scraping lumps and bumps of glue off there. Where the 3 screw heads sit, you often get a little bump on the glue because it fell down into the hole where the screw head was. And if you don't put it in the same position, or you don't scrape the bumps off, then you'll end up with 3 bumps showing on your leatherette. I'll just give these a wipe down with a bit of naphtha, just to remove any loose dust. You can see there's a bit coming off there. They're ready to go on the camera. So to prepare the camera, I've got to remove my film advance lever. Last wipe of the base with some naphtha, just to make sure that there's no grease on there that will stop the adhesive from sticking. That seems pretty good. And now I'll glue it in place. So I have my adhesive here. Now, because it's a larger piece of leatherette, I'm going to be a bit rough and just put a couple of patches here and then distribute it with a toothpick. But it would be better practice to put your pool of glue on another piece of paper and transfer it across. It is desirable that you don't get the adhesive on the front surface of the leatherette. The solvent in the adhesive might melt into the plastic. This stuff's usually pretty good, but it's a bit variable. You never know, and I'm never sure whether I'm dealing with variation in the adhesive or variation in the leatherette. Make sure that's fairly even and there's no excess. Strip that off. Bring back the camera body. Lower the leatherette into position. Yeah, the leatherette is almost certainly a little bit shrunken from what it was when it was brand new. As a result, it doesn't normally push down neatly round raised bosses like this. It'll have to be encouraged. Everywhere else that's looking good. And I'll just remove that little bit of excess squeeze out there. Elsewhere that's looking nice and neat. That's good. I can put the advance lever back in place. Flip those 3 screws up and put the Leatherette patch back on the advance lever. And here I'll be a little bit more cautious. I'll put my adhesive on the paper there and transfer it across on a toothpick. You want good coverage right to the edge. You don't need puddles of it. Now the Leatherette does have a grain if you look at it, and the grain's running across the body this way, and I want the grain on here to run the same way. Here's my Leatherette patch, and the last pieces here is the back catch cover. So to assemble this, I hold these 2 pieces together, put one of the screws up through into the longer of the 2 slots. It's got a little tab on the end there that's going to catch our spring. Fit the return spring, which should hold itself in like that. Bring it up to the camera body and get it gently over the tripod mount. Slide it into position. Do that screw up very gently. If you have any reason to believe that that spring dislodged and didn't stay where it was put, don't tighten the screw, take it apart again, have another go. It's important you do not catch that spring doesn't get caught anywhere it shouldn't be. Otherwise it'll certainly get damaged. Right, so I'm just tightening the screw, checking that that moves nicely, and I can put the screw in on the other side. Check again, make sure the leatherettes are good. Last look at the body, that's looking good. That camera is finished, just needs its shutter done. Well, that was the later camera with the leatherette that gave me no trouble. This is the earlier camera with the leatherette that gave me no end of trouble. And so getting this back in place might not be quite so straightforward. I need everything going in my favour this time. Where is everything I want? There's another toothpick. This is what we want. Right, so let's start with some adhesive on a piece of paper. And start getting this laid onto the leatherette. To scrape the back of this leatherette quite carefully with a scalpel to remove lumps and bumps and loose stuff. Now we've got a little bit of damage right at this point here, so that's going to be, might need some attention there. It depends, it may be largely hidden under the advance lever, in which case it won't be an issue. I do get people ask me from time to time whether I can replace the leatherette on their 65-year-old camera because it's got some minor imperfection that bothers them. But usually the answer is no. They already have the best leatherette in the world. and I'm not going to be able to find a better example in order to replace it. Stuff does just get old. It gets old and it doesn't look perfect anymore. Okay, that leatherette's actually gone back on there pretty well. I'm quite happy with that. In fact, I'm even a little bit surprised it went so well. I just want to remove that little bit of glue from that corner. Okay, otherwise that looks really good. Now, the area where there's a bit missing, let's just zoom in on that. You can just see it. There's a spot right here. Now, where does that sit in relation to the film advanced lever? Yeah, it's still visible even with the lever in place. Okay, I'll need to fill that with something. It's I can see it because I know it's there. I'm not sure that you'd see it otherwise. Come on camera, do your stuff. It's right at this point. I need to fill it. Well, I filled that little spot. You'd be hard pressed to know there was anything going on there. So that leatherette went back on well. So that means that really I've got two camera bodies now ready to have their shutters serviced. I think, given the state of these shutters, one of them I know actually functions. There's probably no point in dealing with that one on camera, but we might as well deal with this greasy mess. So I'll service this one, the other one I won't bother to show you, and hopefully we'll get these two cameras finished. Time to deal with this greasy mess that's masquerading as a shutter. I'll start with naphtha and a cotton bud, and I'll start with the housing, the shutter case. And I've got to swab this inside and out to remove all traces of that oil. Even though it's only oil on the inside that we're concerned about, there's nothing surer than if you leave oil on the outside, it'll find its way in. Where does all the oil come from? Well, it doesn't come from inside the shutter, generally. It's probably sweated out of the grease in the focus helical. It's probably a problem that's exacerbated if a camera is stored somewhere very warm. Basically, the grease, or the more volatile components of the grease, find their way out of the focus helical. One direction is to the front where the shutter is, and it just works its way in from the back to the front. The diaphragm in this particular shutter was absolutely stuck with oil. Now, it didn't move until I'd warmed that up with a hairdryer. If I'd forced the lever, probably the blades would have been damaged. Of course, I haven't had a close look at the blades. They may show some distortion from the lever having been forced in the past when the blades didn't want to move. You know, they certainly don't show any sign of it. Looking at it casually there, that neat rosette of blades glued together with oil. So I'm just trying to get all the oil off the retainer plate here, and there's plenty of it, because you can see by the colour of this that it's I'm getting plenty of oil off that plate. Very occasionally a camera will come in with an inoperative shutter that someone has actually squirted oil into. That doesn't happen very frequently, but it does happen. Once upon a time I had a camera and the shutter was incredibly hard to take apart. That's because somebody had oiled it, but they'd used vegetable oil. It was probably olive oil, something of that nature. And it had oxidised, gone hard, dried. Not only were things glued together with it, it was hard to remove it. This is the moving plate, the plate that is fixed to the aperture setting lever, and as this is moved from one orientation to the other, it swings the diaphragm blades inwards or outwards. Handling this by the edges, because if you don't handle it by the edges you'll end up leaving your fingerprints on it like previous people have done. Some of that because I've seen it on shutters that were new old stock, and in other words they'd never been taken apart from the time they were put together in 1950 something. And they showed problems like that, so I know that it was done at the Deckel factory. Right, let's separate these blades. I think I'll probably have to go over these twice to get the all the oil off. The problem with the diaphragm blades like this in particular is where the rivets are. Get little spots of oil around those rivets, which of course is very hard to see the back of. So I'll clean these blades twice, I think. Right, there's quite a bit of colour coming off there. Okay. Well, that's round one of the cleaning. I'll do that all over again and bring you back. Well, here's my Diaphragm Assembly Jig, and I'll start putting these diaphragm blades in place. The blades just get stacked basically one on top of the other in a circle till you get round to the start. Then the blades have to be tucked in underneath the first blades so that you can reach the mounting holes. That's not much problem at all with a 5-blade diaphragm like this. It gets more entertaining when you've got 10 blades to deal with. Well, they're all in position. Just get them centered. Here is the rotate the moving plate that swings all those blades inwards or outwards. That only goes on in one position. The stud on this plate is here. The stud on the fixed plate is down the bottom there. Then the cover goes over the top without disturbing anything. Flip it over, lift that part of the jig up, put it underneath, and put the 3 fixing screws in place. Now these I wouldn't normally have to bother, but I had to clean these down carefully too to remove the oil, because this shutter is pretty soaked. Right, that's the diaphragm assembled. Let's make sure it all moves freely. That looks good. Tighten those 3 screws up. And that part of the job is done. I'll put that to one side. Let's have a look at this greasy mechanism plate. That's good, it just puddles of oil on that. You could probably clean a component like this with some of that spray-on brake clean stuff. As long as it drained away freely and you're able to blow any excess away, that would probably do the job. But that's not a license to leave things assembled and try and wash them all in one piece. That won't work. You've got to get in under and around. This has even got more crevices to deal with than the plates for the diaphragm, so swabbing this down is a bit more work. Oil tends to lie underneath some of these components here. Some of these components are riveted on, they can't be removed easily. That's looking good. This piece is the lens tube. Now that always has graphite grease or similar around the outside from where various things move or fit. And at the back here, that's where it retains the blade actuating ring. One of the reasons you have to get rid of all the old grease is that it's usually carrying a freight of dust and grit that it's gathered up over time, which acts as a grinding paste. So you want all of it off, and fresh lubricant, where appropriate, put back. This particular camera doesn't look like it's done much work, so it probably hasn't had much opportunity to gather up grit, which means that hopefully once it's cleaned and lubricated appropriately, it will work like a new shutter. That'll do for those three pieces. I better find their screws.